Alright everybody, continuing in our topic of fractals, we are going to be talking about fractals in technology. Our next group is Ian's group.
Hello guys, my name is Ian, and today we're going to be talking about fractals and how fractals are related to technology. Fractals is a curved shape or a geometric shape that uses the same format repeatedly over and over. And I'm going to pass it over to Nancy.
Hello, my name is Vanthi. Today I'll be talking about Juliet set. Juliet set was created by Gaston in the 20th century. And Juliet set is the function that consists of values and the property values that has values and it repeats over and over again. And that process is called iteration. Iteration is basically used to repeat the process by sequence. So I'll be explaining the concept of Juliet set on the board. So they use this equation this is the equation, and the Juliet set is basically the input and output. And the Juliet set just keeps going and going. Basically, it has like variables, and with that variable you can actually replace it with a number. So for example, you can replace it with a 1 or a 2 or a 3. And then you would get this, and that is basically your Juliet set. And then you would graph it. And that's how it works. So Juliet set relates to technology because of Mandelbrot worked around the Juliet set, and he basically used technology to repeat the equation, and it just keeps going on. And he did a point-to-point graph on the computer, and he basically figured out, like when he zoomed in the picture, it looked like that. And if you try to do it by hand, it takes a while because the number gets bigger and bigger. So it's to the point where like it gets big to like infinity. So the technology was more accurate than actually doing it by hand.
Hello guys, again. Today, thank you, Nancy. Today I'm going to be talking about antenna. What is antenna? Antenna is a metric structure that captures or transmits radio, electrical, magnetic wave from one place to another place. For example, it was mainly made for military communication and intelligence gathering through different governments and stuff like that. So back then during World War I, the soldiers we used here. Sketch it out for you guys. So the soldiers we use this type of radio to communicate. And like you had like a long antenna that was probably like 30 feet to communicate. And every time they try to communicate, the enemies will always like know where they are because like the antenna you can see from far away. And they try to figure out a way to like minimize this antenna to a small one so that it cannot be pinpointed for the enemies and being killed. And that's where a German physicist made the first antenna in a small antenna in 1888, which looked like he took the 30 feet and he used fractals by cutting it from the long one to small portions like this. And he was curious if it would still work the same way, to still have the same effect, which it did. And that's where it comes from, like using the same antennas that go like this or like this. And then now in the modern days, we have cell phones, antennas installed in our cell phones, which they use like satellite towers. And that's how we're supposed to, that's how we communicate, by sending our radioactive to these cellular towers and like transferring information to other people, stuff like that. As you can see here, this is the first one, and it's how this dude curved into this by using like different patterns. And like nowadays, we have this in our cellular devices. And I'm passing to love because
hello guys. I'm going to talk about computers. So basically the computers been here around about like 70 to 80 years. They were mostly just used for they were usually mostly used for like figuring out like math problems and basically decrypting codes in World War II. But not these days we're using as like entertainment and basically sending emails to your coworkers. And so after the time passed through, Mandela Borak, this dude figured out fractals creating by intonation. It's basically like a formula that repeated with the values over and over to create images. And I'm going to show an example of it. So if this is a triangle, so if you repeat it, this process over and over, it's gonna come into a star. And then if you do it again, over again, it's gonna come as a snowflake. And you do this process over, the image you really
Show me.
snowflake. So basically, so you break down each the 4 times these triangles. I'll get you.
No, show me.
I need it. So it's gonna look like a snowflake. just that snowflake right there. Moving forward, go to the next slide. So basically, this is the guy that basically created the graphics that basically started the movie. In my opinion, is basically the GOAT. He used to work in Boeing, but after reading the book Fractals by Mendel, he basically came with a great idea to create graphics. Now, from the minimum wage at Boeing, now his net worth is $56 million. And I'm going to show in the movies in Star Trek and how basically he created mountains using fractals. And basically, Genesis effect in Star Trek, it was like the first time seeing the computer in 1982. People were basically amazed by that. And then because before mountains were basically triangles, there was like no, you can play it. Because mountains was basically triangles, there was like no motion behind it. It was just basically boring. I know that the quality is kind of bad right now, but in 1982, like people were actually shocked because it was like the first time seeing fractals in movies, and that basically changed the industry, like how we use it like in Disney movies, like Avengers. Because before that, animators like used to like have like thousands of patterns to create just like 3 seconds of a cartoon, and.
The reformed moon simulated here represents the merest fraction of the Genesis potential.
And the way he created basically the simple method of like creating mountains was basically like getting a landscape, and then he basically drew a triangle, and then there was like these are represent mountains, but he break it down into like 40 more triangles, and he did that process over and over to create mountains. There's also another example I'm going to show in Star Wars Episode 3 when they're fighting over the machine, and then how
lava up into the air. This looks kind of boring. It's doing roughly the right thing, but the
so basically he's using a fractal to create the spiral lava to get emotion more appealing to the audience. Now I'm going to pass it to Diana to explain sounds.
Okay, so another form of technology would be sounds, and one thing is they have this thing called a rendering process, and it's basically when you're putting together the music so that we are able to hear it. And so this would be like an example of it, like the waves here. And then, so this is basically to determine how much of the shapes are used. And one advantage about it is that you're in control of what you want to add into your music or your beat or your songs. So you can choose whatever sounds that you want and just implement it into this. And so musicians like to think of parameters like pitch, rhythm, and timbre. And basically, these are just scales like in time. So basically, if you hear something 120 times a minute or a second, then it's a pitch. And then if you hear something 100 times a minute, it's a rhythm. And then the timbre is basically the overtones of the pitch. And this is so it can like detect the difference in sounds between two. So basically, like an example would be like in choir, you could be singing the same lyrics, but there will be different voices, like sopranos, which is pretty high, and then we have like a tenor, which is pretty low. And so that's basically what this does. And then periodic waveforms. These are the four basic types of waveforms. And these are related to fractals because it's because the waves are represented to repeat, and it makes a tone or a sound. And then this is an example of like just how it would the fractals. anyways, these would be like the patterns. So as it plays with the waves here, the patterns will be the same, but eventually when the when it speeds up, when the waves move faster, it creates a higher pitch or tone. And so like here in the video, if it played, these are they're pretty high or like different from this. So the patterns would change from here. And yeah, so that's what we have. And so the importance of fractals to technology is that you can enhance and create just about anything. So instead of having to use like the basic geometric shapes, now in like the movie industry, they use this a lot, fractals, and they're able to come up with different scenes that like Love mentioned earlier about the Star Wars one, how they made the scene in fractals. So instead of having it like just one simple like wave, you can actually see the effects through that and the lava that it represents. And so yeah, that's basically what we think and why it's important to technology. Thank you.